If you're a developer, you know this feeling. It's a total nightmare, right? You build an application, it runs flawlessly on your own machine, but the second you deploy it, it just breaks. Today, we're going to dig into one of the sneakiest, most frustrating reasons this happens, and it all has to do with the world of browser cookies. So here's the plan. First, we're going to set the scene with this classic deployment mystery. Then we'll put on our detective hats and hunt down the real culprit. After that, we need to get our heads around two really key concepts, SameSite and secure. And once we've got that down, we'll put all the pieces together for the fix. All right, let's dive right into section 1 and frame this problem that I'm sure many of us know way too well. Ah, yes, the famous last words of every developer. If you've ever said this, you know that little pit in your stomach. It's that universal sign that something really subtle and probably super frustrating is going on somewhere between your computer and the live server. Okay, so let's get specific. On the left, you've got your local setup, a NestJS backend, an NestJS frontend, all happily chatting over HTTP on localhost. Everything's green, lawn and works perfectly. But then look at the right. This is the deployed version. The backend's on Render, the frontend's on Netlify, and now they're both using HTTPS. And boom, login fails. The authentication cookie just seems to vanish into thin air. So what on earth is going on here? Okay, let's move on. It is time to start the investigation and figure out what is actually breaking our app. So you spend hours, maybe days, debugging. You're pulling your hair out, blaming everything you can think of, CORS errors, a bug in your framework. But the truth is, it's none of those things. The problem isn't a bug in your code at all. It's actually a fundamental security feature of the web that has to do with cookies and this thing called the SameSite policy. And this brings us to the absolute heart of the matter. Your front-end is living on a netlify.app domain, and your back-end is over on onrender.com. Now, to you and me, they're two parts of the same project. But to the browser, nope, the browser sees them as cross-site. Understanding why is the key to solving this entire puzzle. And that leads us perfectly into section 3, where we have to unpack a really critical idea that trips up a ton of developers, and that is, SameSite is not the same thing as same origin. This table here really breaks down the logic. So look at the first two rows. The browser considers these SameSite because the main part of the domain, the letitcode.dev part, matches. Simple enough. But now check out the highlighted rows. Our situation, netlify.app and onrender.com, is seen as cross-site. And what's really interesting is that a.co.uk and b.co.uk are also considered cross-site. So why is that? Well, here's the why. The browser doesn't just look at the domain name. It uses a specific concept called the registrable domain. And all that really means is it takes the public suffix, like .com or .co.uk, and adds one label before it. So for our front end, the registrable domain is netlify.app. For our back end, it's onrender.com. Since those two things don't match, the browser says, nope, you're cross-site. And that one rule basically governs everything else that happens. Okay, so that's half of the puzzle solved. Now for the second piece, which is all about the secure attribute for cookies. The rule itself seems pretty straightforward, right? If a cookie is marked with the secure flag, the browser will only, and I mean only, send it over a secure HTTPS connection. It flat out refuses to send it over an insecure HTTP connection. But there's a really weird exception to this rule. And this question right here is what causes the entire "it works on my machine" problem in the first place. You're running your local front end on http:/localhost, which is not secure. So why in the world is the browser totally fine sending a secure cookie to your backend? It seems to completely break the rule we just talked about. And here's the secret. This is the answer to the whole mystery. Browsers basically give localhost a free pass. They treat it as a special, secure context, just to make our lives as developers a little easier. Now that's helpful for sure, but it creates this massive blind spot. It hides the truth of how your application is actually going to behave out in the real world, in production, where this special exception does not exist. Okay, so we finally get it. We understand the SameSite rule, and we get the secure rule with its tricky localhost exception. Let's head into our last section and put all of this knowledge to work to finally fix our broken deployment. To get a cookie to work in a cross-site situation, like our Netlify and Render setup, you have to follow 3 non-negotiable rules. First, you have to explicitly tell the browser this cookie can be sent cross-site by setting SameSite to none. Second,
Browsers require that if SameSite is none, you must also set secure to true. And third, because that cookie is now secure, both your front end and your back end have to be served over HTTPS. Seriously, there are no shortcuts on this one.
So what does this actually look like in code? Well, it's actually pretty simple. In your backend's cookie settings, you just have to add these two lines, secure true and SameSite none. That's it. This is you, the developer, basically telling the browser, hey, I get it. I know this cookie is going to be sent cross-site, and I promise it's only ever going to happen over a secure connection. So let's just quickly recap the whole chain of events here. First, we now know that localhost kind of lies to you about security. When you deploy your app to different services like Netlify and Render, you're almost always creating a cross-site context. To make your cookies work there, you absolutely have to set SameSite to none. That, in turn, forces you to set secure to true. And finally, a secure cookie demands that both your front end and back end are running on HTTPS. You see, it's like a chain of dominoes. One requires the next. So, at the end of the day, that localhost exception for cookies is nice, but it's also a trap. It creates a massive blind spot in our development process. And that leaves us with one final, really important question to think about. What other localhost lies are hiding in your code right now, just waiting for you to deploy so they can cause your next big production bug? Thanks for joining me.